Hello everybody, I'm just dealing with this regiment because each regiment has its own complications, and this, for most Cork people, of say 25,000 Cork people in the First World War, up to a quarter would have joined the Munster Fusiliers at some stage. So this is just a group shot of a couple of likely lads at the end of the war. Many people who are tracing their family tree first encountered the term Royal Munster Fusiliers in the early 1900s and the First World War. If your relative was killed during the war, your first stop should be the Commonwealth Graves Commission website, which is a fantastic resource. Choose the advanced search option here, which brings up this page. We're going to look now for a J. Leahy, Royal Munster Fusiliers, First World War, and that will bring you to his death details. You can print off a commemorative certificate if you click on the cemetery link, Dub Corner Cemetery. It will show you photographs and give you details how to get there. There's other details on the burial details there too as well. And also you can check through, this is where he's buried, the actual Commonwealth Graves Commission. Make sure everybody has a headstone or are commemorated. This is James Leahy, here on the left, as you can see, and a young officer from Youghal were both killed on the same day. You can see all the other cemeteries or the other headstones, I beg your pardon, surrounding it. If you go out to France and Belgium, the old Western Front, it's just dotted with these. So this is another source for information on your relative who was killed in the war. The photograph there shows the Munster Fusiliers leaving Clonmare Station in November 1914. These guys would have been reservists, old soldiers who had served 7 years with the colours and then were liable for 7 years with the reserve, and so they would have been all called up at the beginning of the war. So if your relative survived the war, or if you're looking for more information on one who was killed, check amongst the family to see if there are any surviving medals or photographs, etc. So we'll take a look first at any surviving material that you might encounter. First off are medals. Here we have a 1914 star from the First World War. These medals were awarded at the end of the war. The 1914 or 1915 stars were awarded for men who fought in those years only. So this one has the man's service number, which is crucial, and Private J. Barry, and confirms he's Royal Munster Fusiliers. It's also important to confirm that he was indeed with the Munsters, because many people automatically think he might be in the Munster Fusiliers, but you need to confirm this. So the next group of medals, somebody who served through the entire war would receive the 1914-15 star and the British War and Victory medals. Those who only served from 1916 received the last two, the silver and the gold rounded medals there. The service medals, or the service numbers, I beg your pardon, will be on the rim. If you just turn it over, you'll see it. You may also find the top left of the purple long service and good conduct medals, Boer War or Anglo-Boer War South African medals, King and Queen South African medals, and the Indian General Service Medal, the one in the green, and the navy here, Northwest Frontier, 1908. You could also find material like a Royal Munster Fusiliers Old Comrades Association badge. Here we see a group in 1957. All of this confirming that your relative was indeed in the Munsters. Move on. Then there are cap badges and uniform buttons, and rather than get bogged down in the details of uniforms, let's just say that up to about 1908, British soldiers wore a cap without a peak, and you see this in photographs, and this is their cap badge with the crowns of Munster. During the First World War and during the years just before and afterwards, this was the cap badge worn. We see here the Bengal tiger and the Fusilier symbol, the flaming grenade. It was often worn with the felt shamrock behind it, practice begun by the 1st Battalion in India in the years before the war. But it's all about the Bengal tiger really, the regimental symbol. Here we have tunic buttons, but they're not often, or they're not always clear in the old photographs. And collar buttons, then the tiger on this side. You might even come across a Munster Fusilier sweetheart brooch made from a tunic button. You can check through the old photographs to see, but you'll often find that your relative isn't wearing anything on his head, but at least this guy has his cap on his knee, and if we zoom in we can see indeed it's the Bengal tiger on that cap badge. Also worth checking is his death notice later on, which might state late RMF or similar, or indeed any surviving paperwork that says RMF. We now need to say a few words about the origins of the regiment, and this postcard here shows the regimental crest along with that with its predecessors. The Royal Munster Fusiliers were formed during the British military reforms of 1881 by the joining of the 101st and 104th Regiments of Foot with local militia units in the province of Munster, the South Cork Militia, the Royal Limerick and Kerry militias. The new regimental depot was located at Ballymullen Barracks in Tralee, while the local militias retained their bases in Charlesford, Kinsale, Limerick and Tralee, where, as the 3rd, 4th and 5th Reserve Battalions, they were responsible for the training of new recruits and the holding of annual training camps for officers and men of the reserve. The 1st and 2nd Battalions, formerly the 101st and 104th Regiments of Foot, had their origins in British India, dating back to the 1650s, and had also formerly been known as Bengal Fusiliers, from where we get the Bengal tiger. These two battalions were the fighting battalions, but during peacetime one would remain at home, that's somewhere in Ireland or the UK, and the other would be stationed abroad. Here we can see the 1st Battalion of the Munsters in Aldershot in England in 1889. See they're wearing these Glengarry caps, I believe they're called. Or they could be forage caps, sometimes I get confused myself. But the 1st Battalion of the Munsters can be found in the 1891 Census of England at ancestry.co.uk, though there isn't a whole lot of information listed. You can see just a sample of it there. And I was intrigued by this. It says Charles Chaplin and Thomas Chaplin. They're not our guys at all. But still, so there's not the place of birth, it's just listed as Ireland, which isn't great. On the outbreak of the Boer War, the 1st Battalion left Fermoy and arrived in South Africa in September 1899, and it served there until September 1902. The 2nd Battalion arrived in South Africa from British India in December 1901 and remained there until the following September. The militias were also called out during the war, but mainly for home service. You can see these pre-war soldiers can be spotted by their peakless caps and neat uniforms as opposed to the sloppier dress of the war itself. And by the way, moustaches were compulsory until 1916. You can see this guy here is wearing his Boer War medals. You can tell them because they have the bars across. They're bars to show where he fought like. Cape Colony or Transvaal or Orange River. I'm sure Wendy probably will be more familiar with these. So the 2nd Battalion returned to Ireland after the Boer War and were stationed in and around Cork Harbour, Spike Island, etc. It's not a great shot, but I'm sure some of you are aware of the Mitchell and Kenyon film of Cork in 1908. This shows the 2nd Munster Fusiliers marching out of the barracks. That's Collins or Victoria Barracks, Cork in 1902. They just returned from the Boer War, but they were wearing their slouch hats. The 2nd Battalion, you can view this on YouTube or up in Cork Museum, they're always showing it up there. It's just a few seconds of them marching out of the barracks. The 2nd Battalion, next saw service in Gibraltar, Limerick in 1907, before moving to Tidworth in the UK in 1909, and on to Aldershot in 1912, and where they left for the front in 1914. At this period, just before the war, there's a host of photographs, mostly anonymous, we're lucky this one is named, of 1st and 2nd Battalion Munster Fusiliers. You can see them online at Munster Fusiliers websites. This group here went on to go to France in August 1914. During this period, the 1901 census is of little use to us, as it does not enumerate the 1st and 2nd Battalions there in South Africa, and most returns for the militias will only give initials, as is mostly the case for the militias, that's the 3rd, 4th and 5th Battalions in the 1911 census. However, the 1st and 2nd Battalions can be found in the 1911 census, with the exception of one company of the 1st, and the 1st are British in India and the 2nd are in Tidworth. I find if you search for your relative in the 1911 UK census at Ancestry and enter his name, date of birth, if you have it, place of birth, and enter military, just the word military in keywords, it should be possible to find him. Which brings us to the First World War. The bad news is that not all service and pension records and other records survived for the Munster Fusiliers. Those that did can be found in Ancestry and at Find My Past. I find My Past is better for pre-war records, though not always. At Ancestry, we'll just try a search there for Michael O'Donovan, the father of Cork author Frank O'Connor, who served in the Boer War and had some service during the First World War, just home service. You go Ancestry Home, search all records, choose military, and you enter what you know, Michael O'Donovan, born about 1870, Cork, Ireland, keyword Royal Munster Fusiliers. And then I think Ancestry just gives you just too much results, most of which are not relevant. You just need to go down to check British Army World War I pension records and British Army World War I service records. You can ignore most of the rest until I'll explain how to use some of them later. And then when you click on that, this is what you get. You can see misspellings of surnames and regimental names. You often need to search a couple of times just to find your way around it. So we found our Michael O'Donovan anyway in the RI Munster Fusiliers, that's our man. His service record is fairly good. It gives details of his service in the Boer War. And afterwards, during the First World War, he was on service with the militias. So he was mostly based in Limerick at the Curragh. So didn't see the Western Front at all. He was just too old at this stage. So, Find My Past has no results shown, but I find that Ancestry is usually better for First World War files. The files can be full and detailed or just a few scraps, the so-called burnt files. If there is a file, it will note service on the Western Front as BEF, or British Expeditionary Force, or for in the East MEF Mediterranean Expeditionary Force. And afterwards, if your relative stayed on in the army, you can contact the British Army's historical disclosures pension record section. I believe they charge £30 sterling, and they can take up to a year to respond. Which reminds me, actually, thinking of it, if anybody has relatives in the Irish Guards or any of the Guards regiments in the First World War, all those records survived because they weren't kept with the others when the Germans bombed London during the Second World War and obliterated most of the First World War records, and you can get them for the same fee, £30 sterling, from their various regimental headquarters, and they respond straight away either. Officer records are not online, but they're held at the UK National Archives in Kew in London, and you can view them. So if you don't have a service or pension record, what's your next step? You might notice the medal index cards in your searching ancestry. These show the medal entitlement. For his medal entitlement up on the top right, Victory, British and the Star Medal. They show his service number and rank. Note that he was killed in action. Sometimes they can be all different sorts of writing on it. It's just administrative work. If you're lucky, there can be more details on the back, but there isn't in this case. This is James Leahy, whose grave we saw earlier in August, and most importantly, it says the date of entry to the theatre of war, the 13th of August 1914, which is the date the 2nd Battalion of the Munsters arrived in France. And here's a similar one for John Donovan. Also one of 4 John Donovans in the 2nd Battalion of the Munster Fusiliers, who were 2 weeks after the 13th of August 1914 surrounded and cut off by the Germans in France, at Etro in France, and half the battalion, about 500 of them, were taken prisoner of war. They were among the lucky ones because they survived the entire war. This guy here was a bit of a serial prisoner of war. He returned to Ireland, to Cork, where he found his brother was active with the volunteers. You may have heard of a character called Sandow. This is his brother, and he got involved with the volunteers during the War of Independence, and he was apparently imprisoned. And then he was in the Civil War. He was anti-treaty, so he was imprisoned again. He must like it. So you can look there for prisoner of war records. There are prisoner lists at Find My Past, but I drew a blank for John Donovan. Nothing came up. Then you can try the International Red Cross Archives. We'll try John Donovan, and again a blank. Some of the early prisoners of war from early in the war are not up there yet, but they're working on it. However, if we search there for a Patrick O'Leary, a bit of a sad story. On the top left, you can see his mother in the blind asylum was inquiring about him with the Red Cross, because he had been missing since the 9th of May 1915. Missing sometimes did mean prisoner of war, but more often than not it meant he was dead. So he was finally confirmed dead. So he was missing the 9th of May 1915. He was finally confirmed dead in November 1916, and the family put these notices in the paper. Actually, the inquirer must be the sister and not the Mary, and not Alina Calvin must be the sister, yeah. The Cork Examiner, the Evening Echo, the Cork Weekly Examiner are full of these notices. Here we see Jeremiah Fitzgerald, who entered the theatre of war on the 7th of November 1914. These are all joining the 2nd Battalion, which was the only battalion in the field at the time. We'll talk about the other information stamp then later. Another group that was called up were the militiamen like Christy Barry. Note the distinctive militia number 10142. He was like the FCA, the Army Reserve. They'd just go for 2 weeks training every year, and that was it. Probably great crack at the time. They probably didn't realise they were going to be called up. Christy was 19 when he was killed, also on the 9th of May. Barry, O'Leary, Fitzgerald and Leahy were all present at the scene made famous in this painting, the last absolution of the Munster Fusiliers at Rue de Bois, a copy of which was often found in the homes of former Munster Fusiliers. This is the 8th of May 1915. It shows Father Gleeson on horseback giving absolution to the 2nd Munster Fusiliers. And also on horseback then is the Colonel of the battalion, Colonel Rickard, who was married to a lady from Mitchelstown. And behind him is Captain Phil Gate, who was killed a few months later. He was from County Louth, I believe. And the man standing near us is Regimental Sergeant Major John Ring from Bandon, who survived the war. Another painting you might see in the homes of former Munster Fusiliers is when the 1st Battalion went into action at Gallipoli. See them here landing from the ship, the River Clyde, under Turkish fire. So from 1915, we find that the Theatre War date carries the note 1, indicating the Western Front, and 2B Balkans, indicating the eastern fronts of Gallipoli and later Salonika. Here we can see the medal index card of Sergeant Stephen Hearn of Sunday's Well, who landed with the 1st Battalion at Gallipoli. See, it says 2B Balkans on the 25th of April 1915. So if you see that date on your medal index card, you know he landed at Gallipoli from the River Clyde on that date. Also with the medal index card were his mention in dispatch, which is note. He would also be awarded the parchment certificate of the 16th Irish Division or Irish Brigade. It's also known as a Hickey Medal. General Hickey came up with these because he felt that his men in the 16th Irish Division were not receiving enough recognition. So here's our Stephen Ahern before the war in what's now Afghanistan and after the war. So it's the regimental history of the Munsters details all the decorations awarded to each man during and before the war. Stephen Ahern was also decorated with the Croix de Guerre. The Naval and Military Press do this reprint for about £20 sterling, and it's also where you'll find good histories of each battalion. At the beginning of the war, as part of the new armies, the Munsters gained 4 extra battalions. The 6th and 7th were part of the 10th Irish Division and landed at Fusilier, Gallipoli. Their middle index cards will either give the date of their arrival at Gallipoli, the 9th of July 1915. There again you see the 2B for the Balkans again. Or else the date of the landing at Fusilier on the 7th of August 1915. Which means that from July or August until the end of 1915, even if the medal index card says 2B, you're not entirely sure if your man joined the 1st, 6th or 7th Munsters in the East. And of course there are further complications. Here's an officer's medal index card. This is James George Fitzmaurice of Clonakilty. Officers' medal index cards can be a bit of a nightmare to decipher. What that's saying is that he was initially a temporary lieutenant with the 2 RMF, if you see that next to Fitzmaurice. He then, even though he landed at Gallipoli with the 7th Battalion of the Munsters, later in the war he transferred to the Tank Battalion. You see his medal awards there in the top right. Follows then a whole load of different administrative work. It gives an incorrect date of his arriving in the theatre of war, France. Well, he did arrive in France on that date, the 19th of the 11th, 1915, but he had already had service in Salonika and Fusilier Bay. The back of it then says General Officer Commanding, Tank Corps. He's claiming his medals here. It's mostly information there and addresses which to send it to. This man actually was killed at Dunkirk. He rose to be a commanding officer of one of the tank regiments, and he was killed in action in Dunkirk in 1940. You see him here. He is the centre row, second from the left. These are the officers of the 7th Munsters who landed at Fusilier Bay. Many of the corpsmen in this picture were killed. We see 2nd Lieutenant W.H. Good from Carrickmillar, the Travers brothers, C.E. Longfield, and Hallinan survived. He was from Middleton. He was wounded. F.E. Bennett, West Cork as well, he was also killed. The 7th Munsters were disbanded at the end of 1916 at Salonika and absorbed by the 6th Munsters. The merged battalion remained there until the following year, when it moved to Palestine and from there to the Western Front in the spring of 1918, reinforcing the 1st and 2nd Battalions. You'll find that many who served in the East suffered from malaria later in life. The final 2 battalions, the 8th and 9th, were part of the 16th Irish Division. The 8th Battalion, of which arrived in France on the 17th of December 1915 and the 9th on the 19th of December 1918. Here we see D.D. Sheehan, the Member of Parliament for Mid-Cork until 1918, from about 1909 to 1918. He had volunteered as a captain with the Munster Fusiliers and served with the 9th Battalion. There's a lot of just administrative work on it, and we'll see SW badge, we'll get to that later, arriving in France the 17th, same date as the 8th Munsters, but so it's kind of a bit of slack. But those dates, the 17th and 19th of December 1915, indicate that the man served with the 8th or 9th Munsters. The medals, they applied for their medals, by the way, after the war. And the addresses you see there is their addresses about 1920, 21, 22. D.D. Sheehan left Cork in 1918. There you see a portrayal of the 8th Battalion of the Munsters and the London Illustrated News. The 9th Battalion of the Munsters were disbanded in May 1916, and the men distributed amongst the 1st and 2nd Battalions, who were both then in France, and also amongst the 8th Battalion. The 1st Battalion then took its place in the 16th Irish Division. The 8th Battalion was disbanded in November 1916, and the men distributed amongst the 1st and 2nd Battalions, which would fight on until the end of the war in France and Belgium. Now, unfortunately, if your man entered the theatre of war, as it says in the Medal Index card, from 1916 onwards, the date of entry is not recorded. But there are some other sources of ancestry which I'll run through quickly. You can go to the UK Silver War Badge records. You might find the Silver War Badge or Wound Badge among your relatives' effects. You will also notice the letters SWB on the cards, and these were awarded to wounded soldiers and sometimes give information on the battalion the man served in. You might see 2 RMF or 1 RMF or something like 2 Mons Fusiliers. And here we see John Hawkes, who went to France on the 9th of October 1914, later transferred to, you can often see 2 regiments the man might have served at, or AMC Royal Army Medical Corps, but eventually was discharged. We guess it was due to wounds. So we look him up in the silver wound list, and there he is, Private John Hawkes. And you see he originally enlisted in the Munsters in 1912 and was discharged in April 1915 at age 21. He shouldn't, by rights, have re-enlisted, but he did. I see it in his file. There's also medal rolls at Ancestry, which can be a bit tricky to search, as sometimes it's the first name, might be John Hawkes, it's best to put that in, and the regiment. Other times it's best to put in J. Hawkes and the regiment. This will show the man's medal entitlement. There can usually be 2 listings, and sometimes the battalion served with. For those who were killed, Ancestry has a register of soldiers' effects. This is for James Meahy. I hope it's legible there. You see that as a lot of administrative stuff, but see his effects went to his father, William. Ancestry also has a casualty section where you can get more information on the UK soldiers died in the Great War. It will show where he was born, enlisted and resided. Ireland's casualties of World War I is based on the Ireland's memorial records. And there's also others, as you can see, for Royal Naval Division and that. Now, each battalion also kept war diaries, but they don't often mention enlisted men. This is an example of one I just typed up itself for the 28th of April 1916. The battalion here are coming under German gas attack. You see the gas clouds were also observed today. The war diaries are good as well to add further detail to the regimental history. Another source we find are local newspapers, which I've been personally trawling for the past 10 years or so. You can find fantastic information or nothing at all. You can find this is on the left, Bartholomew Barrett, who was awarded the military medal. It says military cross, but in fact military medal. He's from, on the Bartholomew Barrett is from the Cork Examiner. On the right, it publishes these kind of details. As Captain Michael J. O'Brien Toohig is actually a first cousin of Michael Collins. His mother was an O'Brien. He would go on, he served in the Munster Fusiliers at Gallipoli, and then was drafted into a staff officer and worked in British intelligence. His brother was a brigadier general in the Second World War. So, you can also search as well through War of Independence records, like the Bureau of Military History. For so many Munsters and other soldiers came home and joined the volunteers, and some mention is made of them there. You can also get some clues in photographs, though they are a bit vague family photographs. See these 2 guys here, and if you see, they both have stripes, or chevrons as they're called, on their lower arms. These are overseas service chevrons, of 2 years. They were introduced in 1917. So I guess these guys were probably with the 8th and 9th Munsters to begin with. You see that they're World War I era soldiers from their sloppy dress and lack of moustaches. And the man sitting also has, if you can see on, which side is it? On his arm that he's holding his cap in, there's 3 wound stripes for each time he was wounded. These are another of these anonymous photographs that you can pick up on eBay. That the photograph was taken in the American studio, 33 Parkett Street, Cork, and the man standing up is Jack. We know this because it says in the back in pencil that he's half drunk. This is Jack standing up half drunk. So, I have to end on a pessimistic note because despite all of these details, you can end up finding nothing. There can be nothing because there's no information in the family. And without that, it can be sometimes difficult to proceed. You might keep digging in local newspapers. You could get something out of it eventually. Newspapers publish casualty lists, but you would need the service number for that. Or else just keep digging in the family. There's always somebody who knows something. So, I think. Any questions?